This story begins when Bobby Williams had to say goodbye to the neighbors from the next farm. The Gibson family was leaving, for as Mr. Gibson said, this country used to be good. Good soil in the hollows, trees on the hills, but now, well, you just can't make a living. Mrs. Gibson told Bobby to write them in the city. Russell didn't say much, just shook hands. So Bobby said goodbye. It wasn't until he started back up the road that Bobby realized they were really gone. As long as he could remember, they had always been there. Now they were gone, and Russell, the only friend his own age, gone too. It just didn't seem right. The country looked different to him now. It was lonely, and as he walked along, he did a lot of thinking. The old house on the back road, they had often played there, and in the barn, too. The barn used to be a fort, echoing with the war cries of Indians. It was a wonderful place to play. He had never thought of anyone using the barn. Now he saw it as it really was, broken down, deserted by somebody, just like the Gibsons. Mr. Gibson had said the country was worn out and finished. Bobby's thoughts were all mixed up. Down here in Dead Man's Gulch, where they had often dug for buried treasure, there was nothing really but useless sand. And the Gibsons' house. It looked just the same, but it was empty. Mr. Gibson had told him how trees help farming, how some soil is poor for crops, but good enough for trees. That kind of land should never have the trees cleared right off. Deserts just aren't supposed to occur in Canada. And yet, here he was, on a deep sand dune, blown by the wind. Sand. Nothing but sand, and a buried fence. Somebody had tried to grow crops here after the forest was cut down. Maybe, if trees grew here now, they would stop the land from blowing away. Bobby walked across Pine Ridge. It had once been covered with big trees. Then it had been a farm for a little while. Now, it wasn't even a ridge anymore. He went up the side of the dry stream. It wasn't a stream really, just a gully, which got deeper each time the rain filled it with muddy water. Then he came to the bridge. What use was a bridge that was always flooded in the spring and had no water under it the rest of the time? Of course, if it rained, there would be water for a few hours. It rained, all right. He watched the leaves break the force of the rain. It dripped down slowly and was soaked up by the old leaves on the ground below. He saw another spot where it fell on bare earth, forming a tiny rivulet, carrying sand along, growing larger, washing soil away. In his mind's eye, he followed it down, spreading beyond its banks, growing larger still, washing the soil downstream, flooding over a low bridge, coming up around homes, marooning people in their houses. Gone, the good earth, out into the lake. Tons of the topsoil from Ontario farms going out into the lake where no farmer can ever use it. Trees might help, Bobby thought. He remembered a lesson in school. The teacher had explained how water runs off the bare land quickly, often taking with it the topsoil, the only land valuable for crops. She had showed them the way forests soak up and hold the rain, letting it drain off slowly and evenly. He remembered that lesson, and other things too. He remembered how the leaves and twigs on the ground in the forest hold water, and how they let it go slowly into streams which flow along evenly, staying the same size most of the year. He remembered poor land being used to grow trees. The rain stopped, and he came back slowly from his memories and started home, still deep in thought. People always said the land in these parts was poor, but that was no reason why it had to stay poor. Trees could be planted to make the land better. Now his mind was made up. The trees must be brought back again. Why? Right here on his father's farm, there was bad land which should have trees planted on it. He ran across the field to where his father was to talk to him about it. Almost before he arrived, he started to tell him that trees should be planted at once. Mr. Williams was amused at his son's enthusiasm, but Bobby kept on talking until his father said it would take too much help. Well, he would try again. On the way home to supper, his chance came. He tackled his father vigorously about planting trees. When they got to the house, he tried again. How about trees, Dad? Mr. Williams said, okay, come on, we'll talk at supper. Later that evening, he showed Bobby how to write a letter asking for information about planting trees. He himself looked up an address. It'll do Bobby good to write the letter, and something might come of it. So the letter was posted, and something did come of it. A short time later, the district forester paid a visit to the Williams farm. He brought a friend with him, the county clerk. The forester noticed the poor pasture land, land that should never have been cleared of trees. It ought to be planted, but would Mr. Williams think it worthwhile? They met in the barnyard. At first, Bobby held back. But as they left to look over the situation, he stepped right out with the others. As they started, Bobby's father said that he knew that trees would improve his land, but the problem of health seemed too great. However, by the time they came to the fence below the big hill, the forester had showed him so clearly the benefits to be gained by planting trees that he was quite enthusiastic. But the health problem still bothered him. The forester pointed out that the whole of Pine Ridge should be planted with trees, on the neighbors' farms, too. The county clerk said it ought to be a community project then. How? Get the neighbors interested. Children can plant trees as well as adults. You have a tractor. So Mr. Williams sent an application for trees to the Department of Lands and Forests. That application carried the hopes of Bobby, Mr. Williams, and the community. To look after an application, the Department of Lands and Forests must do a lot of work. To begin with, they must have good seed from the cones of healthy Canadian pine. The processed seeds are stored in jars till needed. Looking at these seeds, and even watching them being sown, it's hard to believe that here begins the story of reforestation. But when the seeds become seedlings, then that story starts to unfold before your eyes. When they're a bit larger, the seedlings are ready for transplanting. And then comes the time for them to be dug up for distribution throughout the province. No matter how near or far they are to travel, the little trees are always bundled off with great care. Their roots are dipped in water. They are packed with moss and covered with straw. Each box contains a living forest. This one, along with several others, is going to our friends, the Williams. Bobby and his father called at the station to pick up the boxes. Mr. Williams teased Bobby, who couldn't hide his excitement as he hauled the trees over to the waiting truck. Things had worked out far better than he'd hoped for, and quicker. He wished they'd work out even faster now. As a matter of fact, they did. In no time, the truck was leading the way down the road to Pine Ridge. There, the community tree planting project was getting underway. The district forester was on hand to help. He and the county clerk went over the plans with Mr. Williams. Swing the tractor around. Follow the contour of the ridge. Well, Bobby, you've started something. So the first furrow was turned, and it was time to start the planting of the trees. Youngsters from the school turned up to help plant. There was a lot to be done. To begin with, water had to be ready at hand, enough for the pails of each and every planter. Now, let's see. How have those trees come through their travels? Ah, in fine shape. The roots weren't given a chance of overexposure to sun and wind. They went right into a tub to be kept wet until transferred to the pails of the planters. The planters were formed into crews, 2 to a crew. A man with a shovel, and Bobby first with a pail full of trees. Then the team set out to fill the furrows around the ridge. The soil of the ridge was very light, the kind of soil for slit planting. Working their spades back and forth, shovelers made slits wide and deep enough to hold the roots without doubling them up. Then they were heeled firmly into the ground. So. Working together, the teams made good time. The children were ready with the next tree before the shovel had opened the slit. On public land in other flatter parts of the district, a mechanical tree planter was at work. This part of the campaign had been arranged by the forester's friend, who was, of course, the county clerk. As the mechanical planter furrowed the ground, it left a slit into which the trees were placed at regular distances apart. The machine filled in the earth about the roots of the trees as it went along. Furrow after furrow on the flat, bare fields was planted with trees. Soon, there remained on the ridge but a few more furrows to fill. Then, there was just one more slit to fill. In it, Bobby planted the last tree. The job was finished. Everyone felt proud of it. Wonder how the ridge will look a few years from now. One day, Mr. Williams took Bobby to a part of the country where trees had been planted some years before. It was hard to believe that these trees had once come out of a box, too. Already, they were helping to control water and prevent soil erosion. Soon, they would provide poles and pulp, and one day, even lumber. Let's go up top of the hill so that we can see the whole plantation. It was quite a walk, but it was worth it. As Mr. Williams and Bobby looked down at the new forest, they thought of the bare hills of their own farm. Then, in their mind's eye, they saw their countryside as it would be someday. It, too, would have trees. Trees that would help the land and make it more pleasant to live in. Trees that would make Bobby's life easier when he took over the farm. They looked at the future and were glad.